All right, everyone, thank you so much for being here. My name is Annalyn Palmer. I'm the VP of Professional Development in the Scholars Presidency. We are so grateful to have Dean Patel and Paul Huntsman here today. I'm very excited to hear from them. We're going to hear a conversation between Dean Patel and Paul for the first little bit of the forum, and then we're going to turn it over to you guys for a Q&A. So start to think of questions or anything that you would like to ask Paul. So before I turn the time over to Dave, I'd like to give a brief introduction to Paul. Paul Huntsman is the president of Huntsman Family Investments and chair of the Salt Lake Tribune, Inc. Board of Directors. He served as the owner and publisher of the Salt Lake Tribune until he donated his ownership to create the nation's first nonprofit Metropolitan Daily in 2020. Paul has over 25 years of board-level operations and transactional experience in industrial, financial, and investment services companies. And I'll now turn the time over to Dave.
Well, thanks everyone. Thanks for making the walk over here. When we scheduled this, obviously we didn't know how cold it would be this week, and then Monday rolled around and I think it was 18 degrees below zero. One of my, twice a year social media posts, I posted the temperature, so it's like we're going to make students walk across campus at 18 degrees below zero. So it's now a balmy 15, so thanks for making it. I want to make sure to leave plenty of time for you and your questions, so I just have a few questions we started. So Paul, thanks for making the drive up. We were just on a Zoom call 3 hours ago. And this is the once a semester executive leadership forum for all scholars. So this is all of our Huntsman Scholar in our program, about 350 students overall, and we have some faculty sitting over here. So as we get started, these students, this program is a beneficiary of immense support from your family. So if we can just start with, telling us why you and Huntsman family made this investment in education, and what education means for you, your family, and especially your dad.
Thank you, Dave. It's wonderful to be here, and it's so heartening to see so many Huntsman Scholars here. I think one of the first meetings I came up with my father years and years ago, there were maybe a few dozen, and now we have an entire room full of scholars. So it's wonderful to be able to see what Dean Anderson, what you've built here under your leadership, and we're just so proud to be associated with this program and with this university. Going back to really why. Look, our family's had a great affinity for the state of Utah. Utah State's always, for some reason or another, has held a special place in our family's heart. Maybe because my grandfather, David Haight, was here years and years ago, and he was a great mentor to my father and to me, and was just a great influence in my life. And when the opportunity presented itself to really do a transformational investment into the business school, my father and my mother as well really took this opportunity. And my father, up until then, had spent a lot of time investing and building up the Wharton School at the University of Pennsylvania, which he was a graduate of, and wanted to really bring what he felt was a lot of the analytical and just the outstanding business education that they have there, and bring it out west, specifically to Utah, not have the Ivy League price, but still have the same quality of education. And I think we're getting there. I serve on the board of one of the undergraduate programs at Wharton, which is tied into both Wharton and the School of Arts and Sciences, and it takes some of the most competitive and outstanding applicants around the world. And I always like to compare those with the Huntsman Scholars. And I've got to be honest, as much as I love the students there and everything, I'm always so much more impressed every time I come here to Utah State and meet the Huntsman Scholars here. And so it's a great tribute to each of you, to the leadership here in the school. And I'm just really happy to see what this has become and the direction that it's going in.
Great, thank you. Your father, of course, had a huge influence in shaping what the school is, and his example in many ways helped us to create and develop what we call our 4 strategic pillars: ethical leadership, analytical rigor, entrepreneurial spirit, and global vision. So I want to set the framework for our conversation today around those 4 pillars. You're the president of Huntsman Family Investments and spend, I'm guessing, most of your time analyzing deals in front of you. So from that standpoint for these students, how would you define analytical rigor, and how would you advise them to make better decisions?
Sure. Look, that's you can answer that question in a lot of different ways, and I'm a strong believer in getting as much education and being able to do as much diligence as possible, particularly during not only your formal education, but all of you will eventually transition into a job in which you're going to be subjected to a lot of busy work, a lot of long hours, and that is really a continuation of your education in many, many ways. And so I, again, would just really encourage you to learn as much as you can and to really look at the first 2, 5, even 10 years once you get out of school. It's just a continuation, and that just because you're out of school, it doesn't mean that you stop learning and that you stop developing whatever skill set it is that you have. One of the sort of great statements that my father would tell me, particularly in terms of looking at analytical rigor, is buy low, sell high. Now, I know that just sounds like an oversimplification, particularly when it comes to buying businesses, which is what I'm primarily focused in doing. But it's just such a simple statement. You think, well, duh, yeah, just we obviously want to buy at a lower price, but understanding the analytics behind what exactly that means, and to quantify what exactly buying low and buying at an advantageous price takes a lot of analytical work to really derive at that conclusion. But I've never really forgot that, and it's one of the 3 pillars I have when I buy a business is to buy low. And everyone says they buy low, but the reality is that they don't. Most people don't. And so, but you can't do that unless if you understand the underlying value of exactly what you're buying.
If I'm not a finance student, how does analytical rigor help shape my life?
Look, it's all about problem solving, and it's why. So I'm one of 9 children, and all of us, to some degree, all worked in our family business. My father was more or less a deal junkie. He loved doing deals because, in many ways, it's about problem solving. And I look at my father's impact he had not only in business but most importantly philanthropy, and it's all about problem solving. So as you look at, again, whether it's you're buying a business or other aspects of life, you're looking at it through the lens of really solving a problem and addressing it in not only an analytical manner, but you've also got to address, the other aspects, ethics and values and so forth are also a very key component. But the analytics behind it, you have to go through and understand it. And something that I hope that, I don't want to get into businesses here in Utah, but I think it really...
We'll get to that in a minute.
Okay, all right. I'll just end it there.
So Huntsman Corporation is a global entity, and in fact, some of our students have visited your offices in Europe. And before the pandemic, when I was going to lead some students to Singapore, we were going to visit your offices there. And I think you told me last week you're going to Palau.
Yes.
Later this week.
Yes.
So very much a global. So how do we frame global vision for these students as they prepare to jump into their careers?
So if I can just take a step back, so I serve on the board of the University of Pennsylvania. It's called the Huntsman Program, ironic, which is a combination of both the Wharton School and the School of Arts and Sciences. It was a program that was put together by my father, who graduated from the Wharton School. My brother, John Huntsman, who's a former ambassador to Russia, China, Singapore, and taken the School of Arts and Sciences and Languages and really combining those two skill sets, language, culture, politics, history, and combining that with business to help educate and develop the next, the next generation of business leaders. At the time, the world was just coming out of the Cold War, and Russia was opening, which we never thought would ever happen in our lifetimes. China was just emerging from decades of isolation. The world is becoming flat, and we can begin to see different business opportunities and so forth. So, that was really the intent of that program. I kind of fast forward at 25 years from now, and it's interesting. Everyone sort of gets these offers. I think a lot of financial institutions in New York have sort of found out that there's a lot of really smart students here, so they go and they rate all of them, and they all go up to New York and do financial services the rest of their life. And it's a big criticism I have of the program because we're not developing the next global leaders, which was really the intent of this program. But look, it's the world's much flatter today. Well, in some ways, I can argue that it's we may be perhaps heading into another Cold War. Dave, you mentioned Palau. So one of the businesses that we acquired is a telecommunications business in Guam, and so we have all the fiber and all the telecommunications assets on island. But what we're doing really is helping to develop a network of underwater sea cables that run through Guam and then run into all of Southeast Asia, Japan, and other parts. So if you're over, let's say, in the Philippines and you want to downstream a TikTok, that's probably coming back from a data center or something in California and goes through these underwater sea cables, through a few landing stations, and then eventually, in a millisecond or two, it eventually get to your phone in the Philippines. So these underwater sea cables and these assets are becoming much more critical, but what's really interesting is you're seeing a bifurcation of the internet in Asia. China's going to have sort of one set of assets of their internet communications, and I would call sort of, if you want to call it the West or the United States, and other countries are going to have a separate one, which is really interesting because 15 to 20 years ago, every company was trying to get a presence in China. Huge amounts of investments, including our own legacy company, Huntsman Corporation, spent billions of dollars building assets and building expansions into China. Now today, everyone is running away from China, and there's almost like this, like this iron curtain we saw during the Cold War between China and the Asia-Pacific region, which, in my opinion, is very unfortunate. But that's kind of what's evolving, and so part of what I'm doing in the region is really expanding the presence of telecommunication assets. Facebook and Google, they all want to increase their presence on these islands. The national security agencies in the United States wants to increase their presence as well. China's, I like to call it economic colonialism. They don't go in with the military, they go in with a bag full of cash and business people and assets. They build airports and ports and highways and telecommunications infrastructures around all these neighboring countries to gain influence and to increase their presence rather than through the sword, which is interesting. And so there's a lot of competition and of influence and so forth to try to gain more dominance in that region. But I guess it's a long-winded to say what does this mean for global influence? It's a very complicated world out there. What was a friendly market may not be a friendly market 2 to 3 years from now. So you've always got to be aware of sort of the geopolitical dynamics and the risk in different regions around the world.
That's great. So you said your dad was a deal junkie.
Yes, he was.
We have a statue in the Huntsman Library It's called a riverboat gambler. You're
Yes.
probably familiar with that.
Yes.
So he was at heart, obviously, an incredible entrepreneur. And so how do we develop the habits and mindset, essentially to be open to opportunity, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, even if you don't want to go and create your own business.
Yes.
To be have a mindset of being open to opportunity.
Yeah, yeah. Look, so I obviously growing up under the influence of my father, I also got to know Larry Miller, who I would consider one of the other great entrepreneurs that Utah has produced over the last several decades. And one of the real common themes I found among entrepreneurs is really goes against the grain of what we learn in an academic setting, which is a willingness to fail, a willingness to take a risk that everyone else is telling you, don't do it. This doesn't make any sense. Really being a contrarian and putting yourself in a position where you may fail, you may be humiliated, but you're willing to carry a burden that this may not work out, and it's going to require a lot of hard work, a lot of stress, a lot of sleepless nights to make it work. And so again, it's the heart and soul of an entrepreneur is one that really does carry a lot of sleepless nights and a lot of burden on themselves to really create something that just really doesn't exist. And the reason it doesn't exist is because it's hard. It's hard to go out and build and create something that nobody else has done.
You know that our motto here is dare mighty things, and I think I remind these students every chance I get that it's dare mighty things, it's not dare moderate things, right? And that's, you've got to be willing to fail if you're going to dare mighty things.
Yeah.
I want to pivot a little bit here and talk about, we can get into Utah a little bit here. So a little bit over a year ago, Paul called me and asked if I would serve on the board of the Salt Lake Tribune, where he serves as chairman. So can we just talk a little bit about that, a little bit of the history of the Salt Lake Tribune and your role, and what do you see as the role of Tribune in Utah?
Sure.
And the future of media in general. I mean, we talk about this weekly.
Yeah, sure. So 2004, I was presented with the opportunity to buy the Salt Lake Tribune. I knew nothing about journalism other than I read the paper like many of you. But I looked at it like a lot of other deals and looked at it. It was in the red. I thought it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. But ultimately realized that it's in a position where a 150-year journalistic institution that's played a critical role in providing trust to our institutions, our political institutions, our religious institutions, our rule of law, our culture. Journalism, that's really the role that journalism plays in our institutions. They provide trust to us as the consumer and the reader that, look, there's transparency, they're making the right decisions, and just helping shine a light on the different aspects of how our society functions. So it took me 2 years to negotiate this transaction, and bought it for a very, very good price, obviously, and thought, well, this shouldn't be that bad. I can figure this out. And so, anyways, fast forward about 3 years, and didn't buy it for any financial benefit, but I was spending probably 70 to 80% of my time trying to fix it because I refused to fail on this transaction, and it was bleeding money, and I just didn't know what to do, and I couldn't let it fail. Partly because of pride, partly because I realized that if you let an institution like this fail, it allows and permits bad behavior among a lot of our institutions that we all love. I've spent time in China, I've spent time in Russia when my brother was ambassador. Wonderful countries, wonderful people, but the main difference between those countries and the United States is the rule of law and the ability to have the freedom of press, to provide transparency among our decision makers and to hold them account. And in Utah, where we have a state that's dominated by one political party and by one institution. It's imperative that we have good journalism. I mean, I compare it a lot to business. You look at businesses today, a public company, they have to report, they have to be fully transparent on a quarterly basis. They have equity and credit analysts that are constantly scrutinizing their decisions, their balance sheet. Every penny is accounted for, and the executives are held accountable. And what does that lead to? That leads to better decision making, because they know that they can't get away with bad decisions. That's no different than in our government, having good journalism, providing transparency and providing accountability for those making decisions. So eventually, look, you get your back against the wall, and eventually, you find a solution. And to me, that was coming up with new sources of revenue, which is what journalism needed. As you go from, dollars in the paper to pennies, on mobile phones in terms of lost ad revenue. So ultimately decided that, we're going to go to a nonprofit route to be able to tap into philanthropic dollars. And so that's proved to be a huge success. We get about 40% of our revenue now from philanthropic areas, and we've gone from about a $3 million loss to about a $500,000, $250,000 profit, which is good. We're not there yet. We've kind of turned the ship around, and we're heading in the right direction. But it's been a really tough go, and my business colleagues just keep wondering why do you just keep doing this? And again, wanting to make a difference, a state that I love, and wanting to try to solve a problem. Again, going back to the analytics, I analyze this thing every which way, and that's ultimately what I came up with.
Yeah. So I'm going to guess that everybody here gets all the information from here.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
So if you look at that, and we talk about this a lot, so what's the future of not just the Trib, but media in general, right? Because it's unfiltered information.
Yeah.
It's not verified.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And we've seen the harm of that.
Yeah.
The positives also, but the harm of misinformation.
Yeah. Look, so everyone does have a cell phone, and I assume everyone here has a social media account. Is that fair to say? I'm just going to make that guess that that's probably true, which means that every one of you in here is a publisher. No different than what a publisher would be back in the day of a newspaper owner. Some of you may have as many followers as some of the most recognizable journalists here in the state of Utah. You may have an audience that's just as big. Some of you may have one that's even bigger. We know that there's personalities around the country that have millions, hundreds of millions of followers, and yet what is the difference between them and a journalist? So why is it so important for us to maintain a journalistic entity and to maintain that vertical of journalism? Because again, everyone's a publisher today, and again, I like to say that journalists, in theory, we all have a set of standards, ethics to follow. We have editors. We go through, we double check the sources of truth before we go through and publish. And that's always kind of been the rules of the road that journalists have followed. But in today's world, journalism gets mixed in with commentary, which gets mixed in with personalities, which gets mixed in with influencers. And before you know it, you don't know the difference between someone who's a journalist and someone like Kim Kardashian. They're all sort of one and the same to the audience today, which makes the distribution of information that much more difficult for all of us to consume and to know really what is the truth and what's right and what's wrong.
So one of the things I look forward to every week is on Wednesday, every Wednesday at 2 o'clock, We get together as 5 of us who sit on the editorial board of the Salt Lake Tribune, Paul and I and 3 other people. So we talked about social media today. There's a piece of legislation in the Utah legislature about essentially banning or requiring some sort of a filter, verification before we can access social media, right? And we just sat and talked for an hour about what our view, the paper's view, is going to be in an editorial we publish every Sunday on this, that, or other issue. And every week, whatever issue we're discussing, one of the things that Paul always comes back to is the importance of leadership and vision, or lack thereof, as either the cause or the solution to whatever we're talking about. So for my final question before we turn it over to students is about leadership. Right? Why does leadership matter? What makes a good leader? And especially how these students approach the gray areas, right? It's not black and white all the time.
Yeah.
As they encounter them.
Yeah. Yeah, look, the namesake of this school, my father, John Huntsman, for those in the room that knew him, I wish he was here because he was the embodiment of leadership. Yeah, of course, he had the charisma, he had the vision. He liked getting out in front of people, and being a problem solver. It's hard to define leadership today, and it's just not all about being an extrovert. It's not all about being the loudest person in the room. Leadership today comes in all different forms, and one of the great things I love about Utah is we have such a large citizenry that cares and that cares and loves their state, their neighbors. There's a great work ethic here, and it's really unlike almost any other state. It has just such a great sense of community here, and it really lends itself to produce a lot of individuals that can play an outsized role in their fields in which they go into. And but I think it all just goes back to the 4 pillars, Dave, that you talked about, which are part of the school. And even if it doesn't deal with business, it's still, everything in life deals with again, understanding the analytics, understanding and being able to kind of see through whether it's the numbers or whether it's just all the debris and the noise around to be able to make the right decision. Being able to have a moral compass with your ethics. And I always feel that if you want to find a person's true character, you wave a dollar bill out and see what they're willing to do. And I always find it interesting when I get to selling one of our businesses and we have a lot of other co-investors and how they react to the distribution. And one of our last sales, someone invested $20 million into this investment. I gave them back $50. They wanted to sue me for $250,000 because they couldn't find the right paperwork to justify the deal fee that I took. And I said, okay, let's go to court over this one. Anyways, we got to the end, and of course they dropped it because they, wanted the money and so forth. But up until that point, we were very close. I haven't spoken to the individual. He really wants references about him and his fund to other of his investors, but I can't do it. It's just you find out about a person's character pretty quickly when it comes to when you put money in front of them. Going back to the entrepreneur spirit, I mean, how many of us are willing to get out in front of an issue and to be willing to be exposed and to potentially fail? And that's just very contrarian to our human nature. But that's really what takes really that's just another great quality and characteristics of what a leader is.
That's great. So let's open it up for students. We've got mics on either side. Please state your name and maybe what you're studying here, and right here, right at the front. Yeah.
Hi, my name is Carter Gomez. First of all, I just want to say thank you for the Huntsman Corporation for everything they've done for us. And I know that you get to spend a lot of time talking to the faculty and the leaders here and giving them feedback and advice about how to make this program better. And I think this is an opportunity for us to get direct feedback from you. What can we do as students to make the Huntsman program better?
Well, look, I'll tell you the same thing that I tell the students at the Huntsman program at the Wharton School, and that is, I want to see you populate our state houses. I want to see you populate the C-suites of major corporations. Again, going back to leadership, I want to see the graduates here, populate our institutions around Utah. And again, that's not going to happen in a month or two or a year or two. I get that. But, I hope with what we're training here and a lot of the ethos that we're, again, not just the analytics, but what I also just as important, if not more important, the softer skills, the ethics are incorporated, and it leads to really benefiting not only our state, but our country and this world, to making it a better place. So again, would like to see the presence in both C-suites, state houses, leading foundations, other organizations, nonprofits, whatnot. Would really like to see us populate around.
That's great.
I'm Matt Ritchie. I'm studying economics here. So you grew up in a house with a really big name, and you've kind of continued that legacy. You live a very in the spotlight life, so to speak. Was there ever a temptation to live quietly and maybe go an easier path? And why did you choose to go the big way?
Why do you choose to be constantly attacked on Twitter, Paul?
Look, some of us enjoy being in the arena. I think it was Theodore Roosevelt. I mean, he applied it to politics, getting into the arena and making a difference. Look, I grew up as an introvert. I wasn't, the best in my class. I'm 53 years old. I often spoke to my father. I was down in the lower half of the family, and the older brothers, they sort of got assumed the role, all the leadership roles, just by where they were within the ranking of the family by age. You got to love nepotism, but look, I've been a great beneficiary of it, so I'm not going to criticize it. I recognize that I've been extremely blessed, and I've been in a very fortunate situation. I also didn't appreciate till after my father passed what a great mentor I had in life, and I had an obligation to give back. I like to get in the arena. I like to spar with different institutions, because it's just I feel in my own heart of hearts that I've got maybe something to give. I don't mean that in a boastful way, but I hope I can make a difference. So when I leave this life, I've made the world a tiny bit better. But it's fine. I mean, some of my siblings, they don't care to get in the arena as much, and that's fine. I respect every individual, but it's taken me sort of 25 years, and I would often ask my father and say, I kind of want to jump ahead and do this, and that, and he'd say, just keep learning. You've got 20 years, and then you'll eventually find your place. And he was right. I didn't get it after 5 years, like some of my siblings, and I'm really happy that I didn't. I'm happy that I spent 20 years making mistakes, watching people fail, seeing my own successes, seeing how people succeed. And it took me a long time and a lot of life lessons before I felt like I was sort of ready to step out and to try to make a difference.
So I'm wondering, a man of your position probably has to often look and observe and analyze people. And so I'm wondering, as you observe and analyze the people that you work with, what are the characteristics that you value and look for, and how do you go about looking for those?
That's a good question. It's hard. You really don't know somebody until... I've always felt you don't know somebody until you you present an opportunity in front of them that involves money. And you find how generous people are if they're generous. I've always felt it's important to take care of the people around me before I take care of myself, and I think it's been something that's really benefited me because I have a very loyal and hardworking team, and I like to see their growth. I like to see their successes, but it really goes deeper to the heart of somebody, of both not only their intelligence but their values, their characteristics, their honesty. And it's hard to sort of quantify that quickly, but I've always found that when you have money involved, you really do find someone's true identity and true character.
I'm Ryan Smith. I'm studying finance. The question I wanted to ask, can you share with us either an experience or a memory you have with your father that just got really instilled into your hearts, something that really made you proud of him, and something an experience that you won't ever forget?
Oh boy, let's see, which one? Look, often when you read and hear about individuals such as my father and other people that got a lot of success, you rarely hear about their failures and when they're down in the dumps and when the chips are stacked against them and the sharks are kind of circling around them. And that, again, like any great entrepreneur, my father had many great peaks and success and making a lot of money, but he also had several valleys in which he had a lot of people circling the sharks trying to sort of take advantage of him. So this was, again, I was probably 7-8 years into my career. I had worked in investment banking, then went back and worked with the family business. And he was going through one of these times where he was in the valley and sort of over-levered the business, and the creditors were coming in, and he was trying to negotiate his way out of it. And his own team was telling him, you've got to go bankrupt. And he was like, no, I'll never go bankrupt. That's just not who I am. I don't ever want that on my record as an individual. And so not only was he finding his team internally, but he was fighting against every type of creditor, from senior lenders to bondholders to mezzanine, and all these different layers of debt, and bankers and lawyers, and then his own team as well. And watching him go through that, and one particularly group, he flew down to Cabo San Lucas, and he had about, I think it was maybe $2 billion of bonds that they were trying to foreclose on him. And anyways, I was fortunate enough to accompany him down on that trip. And so they went in there and they said, look, John, the gig's up. We're going to, come in and take over your business, and we're going to, convert all of our bonds into equity. And he said, that's great. I'll walk out tomorrow and I'll take my key customers and they'll all follow me, and we're just going to go do this again on a different platform. And you're welcome to do that. And so anyways, the next day, and again, he didn't have any advisors with him. He didn't have any bankers. They all thought he was crazy. And he went down there and basically convinced them to, quite frankly, to sell all of their holdings back to him. And it was just one of many steps he did, but he did all this alone. And because it was his charisma, his belief in himself, his belief in what he had built. And to him, again, taking out the analytics, this was an emotional and ethical decision to him to do what is right, and for standing up and having the conviction that what he was doing was right. So this goes back to just the ethical and the belief in yourself that what you're doing is right. and which is so critical and so important, particularly when the chips are stacked against you, which, quite frankly, all of us need to go through that to become a really smart and successful business person. We've got to go through really tough times and, quite frankly, some failures.
I'm Isaac Natuvai. I'm studying marketing here. Some of the things you've mentioned, and with your background, I imagine you make a lot of pretty big and risky decisions in your day-to-day life. And I was just wondering, as you go throughout your professional and individual life, what does that decision-making process look like for you? What are the steps in that? And finally, what are the indicators that determine whether you do or do not make any specific choice?
Oh, great. All of us need a balance in life. It can't be all business. We all need an outlet, whether it's family, whether it's other hobbies. Again, just going back to my father, the business was just an ends to the means. Means was philanthropy to leave the world a better place. Huntsman Cancer Institute, which is the largest genetic research hospital in the world, would not exist without my father. Now we're doing the mental health facility, which we hope to be the world's first comprehensive care mental health facility. All of the deals that I do, the proceeds go right back into our philanthropy. My siblings can't spend the money fast enough, and so I feel a great sense of burden to make sure that I, quite frankly, can outperform them, and I can make money faster than they can give it away. So it's good. There's a purpose to everything. You want to go buy another house or a car or whatever, sure, that'll give you joy for, an hour or two, maybe a month. And then you need something of substance and a purpose in life. So whatever that is, there always needs to be something greater beyond just your business objectives.
Hi, my name is Adam Smith. I find that in the business school, I've gotten to meet lots and lots of people, amazing people, and in your business life, it sounds like you've got to make relationships with probably hundreds and hundreds of people across the planet. How do you make sure that those relationships are genuine and good, and also manage just knowing that's so many people that you can draw on in so many different situations to help you? How do you keep up with that?
Yeah, look, relationships you find in the business world are only as good as what someone wants out of you. So in my case, someone may want funds to invest in their business. In my case, I may need somebody to gain better access to a deal or to open a door here or there. So you can never have too many friends. And again, even those that sort of cross your path, and that you find that, I'm not sure if I want to do business with them again. You sometimes find that they're sort of maybe on the same side as you 4, 5, 6, 7 years later. So you can never have enough friends, and your reputation can only go so far. I've been a tremendous benefit of what my father has built, and I've really begun to appreciate over the last 5 to 10 years the name and the reputation and brand that he's built over the course of the last 40 years has benefited me to get into doors and to be able to transact deals at a much lower price than anyone else, because they want to do a deal with us because of the brand and the values and the reputation that my father established. So I recognize I'm terribly fortunate to be able to be the beneficiary of that, but it takes a while to be able to build that great reputation. And people ultimately want to do business with people that they trust and that they want to do a deal with. It's not always about the lowest price and about dollars.
Hello, my name is Ben Swan. I'm an information systems major. Of course, we are all aspiring global leaders. My question is, what sets you apart as a global leader, and what is going to set apart the next generation of global leaders?
Sure. So I have a hard time recognizing myself as a leader, and it's, again, I recognize the brand and the association I have just because of the family that I was born into. I've tried to take advantage of the opportunities that have been presented to me, and I still feel like I've got a long ways to go. And I feel that the brand that I do represents a lot of people and not just me. But as I look at future leaders, if I can just go back to this point about here in Utah. Utah's a state that I love deeply. It's one that I hope that over the course of my life, as we continue to give away more and more money, and we give it to very few causes because we like to go really big into areas such as the Huntsman School here, into mental health, into cancer. Those are sort of our three pillars, more or less. I do worry a lot about the reputation that Utah has built over the years in terms of I'll just say fraud. Today's Washington Post, the cover story, was on fraud that two people had established down in Las Vegas. Even though it's Las Vegas, it ties back to the faith that's everyone associates with here in Utah. And that story's been repeated over and over and over and over and over again here in Utah. We need to have this next generation change that narrative. We need real businesses here. And what I mean by real businesses that generate cash flow, businesses that have real customers and interaction with those outside of the borders here. We have so much going on here in Utah. We've got one of the greatest entrepreneur classes here. We have a lot of great business, civic-minded people, wonderful quality of life, a highly educated population here, and yet we just can't get out of our own way when it just comes to the softer side of business, which is the ethical side of business. I've seen it so much firsthand with my associate with the Tribune, and as I see story after story, it just really is sad and depressing that, especially since COVID, we've seen a massive redistribution of wealth and of labor and of technology leaving these hubs in California, in Chicago, and in the Northeast area, and they're all flowing to different parts of the country, Florida and Texas and North Carolina, Georgia, and even Idaho as being the beneficiary. Utah should be at or near the top of that list. We have everything going for us, but yet there is not the trust of those on the outside that when they bring their capital and their labor and their technology in here, that we're going to do the right thing. And we have to change that. And we need a whole new crop of business leaders that can really establish a relationship or a reputation of trust and of confidence among the business community outside the state.
We have time for maybe one more question. Up front here, Brock.
Hi, my name is Amy Morales, and and coming from a legacy that has dedicated itself to giving back to others, how do you communicate the core values with other people and other leaders that you work with and interact with on a daily basis?
Look, I think that, and I try to educate my siblings on this because I don't even know if they quite appreciate and understand this. Our family's greatest brand is philanthropy. It's not business. It's not politics. I've got one brother that's trying to go into entertainment, whatever movies, but our reputation as a family will always be philanthropy and giving back. It started with my father. It's going to continue with my generation. I hope my kids' generation doesn't mess it up at all. But that's really where I think our brand is as a family, and I'm reminded every time that I take business associates up to the Huntsman Cancer Institute or to the Huntsman Mental Health or to other areas that we give to and say this is what business is all about, and it becomes very clear and very abundant to them. I look at the other great entrepreneurs that I really respect and love to read about around the country today, and I think all of you recognize their names, but what's really going to be their legacy? 30, 40, 50 years from now, what are they going to leave behind? And I never thought my father, in his great business career, that, we would have a cancer center that is his legacy. And nobody knows about the deals he did, nobody cares about the deals he did, but what people do care about is the difference he made in saving the lives of a loved one that went through that facility. And so that's something I really can't run away from. I embrace it. I'm proud of it. And again, it's not something that I did. It's something my parents started, and my siblings have sort of, hopefully taken it up a step higher now.
Thank you. That's a great response, and thank you for that question. That's a great time to end because, and let me just say, be the first to say, we all are so appreciative of that philanthropy from your family to give back. I think these students are benefiting greatly from the education that's supported by you, so thank you. Thanks for coming up.
Thank you. Thank you, Dave.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody.